The gavel didn't fall. There was no judge, no jury, just you, sitting in a $3,000 suit around a mahogany table in a climate-controlled room overlooking the Chicago skyline. That was the exact moment you decided that 3,000 people were going to die this year, not by pulling a trigger, by setting a price. You looked at the spreadsheet, analyzed the maximum threshold of insurance payouts, and priced your new autoimmune drug at a clean $84,000 a year. You knew exactly how many couldn't afford it. You called it acceptable attrition. If people think the healthcare system is broken, they are dangerously mistaken. It is working exactly as it was designed to. You know this better than anyone because for 20 years you were the architect building it. Let's drag you back to the beginning, before the corner office, before the blood money. 20 years ago, you were 24, a junior lab researcher with a freshly minted degree, drowning in student debt but burning with absolute conviction. You believed in the white coat. You believed you were the good guys. Your team had been working on a compound targeting a specific chromosomal trigger for a debilitating chronic respiratory disease. After 14 months of trial and error, sleeping under desks and staring through a microscope until your eyes bled, you found it. Not a treatment, a cure. Complete cellular reversal in the animal models. You remember sprinting down the sterile white hallway to your R&D director's office, clutching the data printouts like winning lottery tickets. You thought you were going to change the world. You thought you were going to be on the cover of Time magazine. He looked at the papers. He didn't smile. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked at you with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "It's a beautiful molecule," he said, sliding the folder back across the desk, "but it's a terrible business model. A patient cured is a customer lost. We don't make money curing diseases. We make money managing them. For life, scrap the compound, pivot the research to symptom mitigation." That was the day the scientist in you died, and the executive was born. Your idealism didn't survive the winter, but your ambition, it thrived. Within 3 years, they moved you out of the lab. You were handed a new title, life cycle manager. It sounds clinical, responsible. It isn't. Life cycle management is corporate code for a very specific dark art. How to keep a monopoly alive forever. You learned the rules of the patent game. A pharmaceutical patent gives you 20 years of absolute unquestioned power. For 2 decades, you own the market. You dictate who lives comfortably and who goes bankrupt trying. But what happens in year 19? The patent expires. Cheap generic competitors flood the market. The $1,000 pill drops to $10. The cash cow bleeds out. In any other business, you would have to, innovate to survive. You would have to invent a better product. Not here. Here you use a loophole. You use evergreening. It's a breathtakingly cynical magic trick. You take a blockbuster drug that millions of people physically rely on to function, a drug that is weeks away from losing its patent. You don't make it better. You don't cure more people. You send it back to the chemist with a single directive, change it just enough to file a new patent. You tweak the delivery mechanism. You change the pill from a capsule to a coated tablet. You alter a single biologically irrelevant molecule, a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling house. Then the real work begins. You launch this new and improved version. Simultaneously, you quietly pull the old, expiring drug off the market. You fund a massive marketing blitz, whispering to doctors that the old version is suddenly obsolete, maybe even less effective. You force the entire patient population onto the new patented drug. Meanwhile, your legal department drowns the generic companies in court injunctions. The monopoly is extended for another 20 years. No new science, just legal gymnastics. You sat in the boardroom the day the judge granted the injunction blocking a $10 generic alternative to your flagship painkiller. They popped champagne. You drank it. It tasted like victory. You didn't think about the families maxing out credit cards to afford the new formulation. You only thought about your year-end bonus. You didn't stay in life cycle management for long. They saw your potential. They saw that you didn't flinch. So they gave you a seat at the adult table. Commercial operations. This is the room where the mask finally comes off. Imagine a conference room. No windows, just whiteboards, catered sushi, and screens displaying actuarial tables. You're standing at the head of the table. In your hand is a small glass vial. It contains a synthetic enzyme that prevents a rare fatal blood coagulation disorder. "What does it cost to make?" a senior VP asks. You check the spreadsheet. $14.20 a dose, and that includes the glass vial. "And our R&D costs?" You smirk. Taxpayers funded the baseline research through government grants. We just bought the patent from a cash-strapped university. Our sunk cost is virtually zero. Then comes the only question that matters. So, what do we charge? In a normal market, a product that costs $14 to make might sell for $50, maybe $100, but you're not operating in a normal market. You're operating a legally sanctioned extortion racket. You pick up a dry erase marker, you write a number on the board, $12,500 per dose. The patient needs 2 doses a month, forever. Someone clears their throat. Will the market bear $300,000 a year? You don't talk about the patients as human beings. You don't picture their faces. You use the corporate shield. We are utilizing value-based pricing, you explain smoothly. What is the value of not dying? It's infinite. The patient will drain their retirement accounts. They will sell their home. They will beg on the internet. But more importantly, the major insurance providers have no choice but to cover it. They will just pass the cost on to the public through higher premiums. Silence falls over the room, not out of guilt, out of awe. No one argues, no one brings up the uninsured, no one asks about the teenager whose parents work hourly jobs. You cap the marker. The meeting takes exactly 12 minutes. You just generated $2 billion in projected annual revenue, and you still had time to make your lunch reservation. You think your doctor's prescribing you that medication because it's the best option for your health? Wait until you find out who's paying the mortgage on their summer house. With billions of dollars at stake, you can't leave sales up to chance. You certainly can't leave it up to the objective medical judgment of physicians. So you build an army. We call them medical science liaisons. But let's drop the bullshit. They were sales reps. As a regional sales director, you managed 50 of them. They weren't scientists. They were former cheerleaders, ex-college athletes, and models in tailored suits. Attractive, charismatic, relentless. Their job was not to educate. Their job was to manipulate. But you don't walk into a doctor's office and hand them a briefcase full of cash. That's illegal. That's clumsy. You do it elegantly. You invite Dr. Smith to a medical conference. The conference happens to be at a 5-star resort in Maui. You fly him first class. You put him up in an ocean view suite, and while he's sipping a Mai Tai, your rep casually slips him a brochure for your new antidepressant. But Maui isn't enough. You need him loyal. So you make him a key opinion leader. You pay him $50,000 a year in consulting fees to give a 10-minute speech about your drug at a dinner you paid for to an audience of other doctors you flew in. Suddenly, Dr. Smith isn't just a physician, he's on your payroll. And miraculously, the very next week, his prescription rates for your drug skyrocket by 400%. You push the limits, you train your reps to market drugs off-label. That means convincing doctors to prescribe a drug for a condition the FDA never approved it for. A seizure medication gets pushed for weight loss. An antipsychotic gets marketed for mild anxiety. Is it dangerous? Absolutely. Is it legal? Technically, no, but you do the math. If you get caught off-label marketing, the Department of Justice might slap you with a $2 billion fine. But by the time they build the case, you've made $10 billion in profit from those illegal sales. A $2 billion fine isn't a punishment. It's just the cost of doing business. You pay it, sign a piece of paper promising to behave, and immediately start planning the next campaign. The house always wins. You don't stay in regional sales. The real power isn't in convincing a doctor to write a prescription. The real power is in writing the laws that govern the prescriptions. So they promote you. Vice President of Government Affairs, you pack up your life and move to Washington, D.C. You trade the medical conferences in Maui for closed-door steak dinners on K Street. You are no longer selling pharmaceuticals. You are buying politicians. People think lobbying is just slipping a congressman an envelope of cash in a dark alley. That's amateur hour. In Washington, bribery is institutionalized. It is polite. It is legal. How do you buy a senator? You don't offer them money for a vote. You offer their re-election campaign a massive donation through a dark money super PAC, and you hire their former chief of staff as a consultant on a $500,000 retainer. You promise them a highly lucrative corporate board seat the day they retire from public service. And in exchange, they let you hold the pen. You aren't just suggesting laws, you are literally writing them. I want you to think about the absolute audacity of this. You sit in your corporate office drafting a piece of legislation, handing it to a lawmaker whose campaign you funded, and watching them read your exact words on the Senate floor as if it was their own brilliant idea. Your masterpiece? Making sure the United States government, the single largest purchaser of healthcare on the planet, is legally prohibited from negotiating drug prices. Think about that. If the government buys a fleet of fighter jets, they negotiate the price. If they buy paper clips, they negotiate. But when it comes to life-saving medication for millions of elderly Americans under Medicare, they are legally bound to pay whatever price you decided to write on that whiteboard. You didn't just bend the rules. You rewrote the rulebook to make sure your company could never lose. You turned the American taxpayer into a blank check. You turned the entire legislative branch of the federal government into the customer service department of your pharmaceutical empire. To celebrate, your firm throws a gala, you wear a tuxedo, you drink a $1,000 bottle of wine, and you clink glasses with the very government regulators who are supposedly there to oversee you. Then, the phone rings at 2 a.m. It's the head of clinical research. Your next multi-billion-dollar drug, a revolutionary weight loss injectable, is in phase 3 trials. FDA approval is weeks away. Wall Street has already priced the projected revenue into your stock, but there is a problem. The data just came back. 4% of the trial patients are developing severe liver toxicity. 2 have died. A normal person would halt the trial. A normal person would issue a public warning. You are not a normal person. You are a vice president of a Fortune 500 company. You don't see dead patients. You see a catastrophic drop in share price. So you call an emergency meeting. You don't ask the scientists how to fix the molecule. You ask the statisticians how to fix the data. It is a process called p-hacking, the dark art of torturing clinical data until it confesses to, whatever you want. You look at the patients who died, you dig into their medical histories. One of them smoked in their 20s, the other had a vague family history of heart disease. Perfect. You legally reclassify their deaths as unrelated to the study drug. Then you retroactively change the trial's exclusion criteria. You remove anyone with a BMI over a certain threshold, conveniently eliminating the sickest patients from the final data set. By the time your statisticians are done scrubbing the numbers, that 4% toxicity rate magically drops to 0.5% acceptable risk. But the FDA needs more than internal spreadsheets. They need peer-reviewed science. So you hire a medical PR firm to ghostwrite a glowing 40-page clinical report praising the drug's safety. Then you find a prominent medical professor at an Ivy League university. You offer his department a $2 million unrestricted research grant. In exchange, he allows you to slap his name on the paper as the lead author. He didn't write a single word of it. It gets published in one of the most prestigious medical journals on earth. The FDA reads the journal. The regulators see the Ivy League name. They stamp the approval. Your stock surges 14% in a single afternoon. You just legalize poison, and the paperwork is absolutely immaculate. The greatest threat to a pharmaceutical empire isn't a government regulator. It isn't a class action lawsuit. It is a cure. You learn this during your third year on the executive committee. A boutique biotech startup out of San Diego makes a breakthrough. A handful of brilliant, underfunded scientists are using targeted gene therapy to permanently reverse a condition that your company currently treats with a $5,000 monthly injection. You read their phase 2 clinical data. It is flawless. If the startup secures enough venture capital to finish their trials and hit the market, your $5 billion a year cash cow is dead. Instantly, a naive executive would panic. A naive executive would tell the R&D department to work harder, but you are a predator. You know that you don't need to beat them in the laboratory. You just need to buy them. Welcome to mergers and acquisitions, the corporate term for assassination. You fly to San Diego. You sit across from these brilliant, exhausted scientists. You tell them how much you admire their work. You promise them that with your massive global distribution network, their cure will reach millions of patients overnight. Then you slide a piece of paper across the table, an acquisition offer for $800 million. They're scientists, not ruthless businessmen. They look at the number, they think about the lives they will save and the generational wealth they just secured. They sign the papers, they shake your hand, they think they just won, they didn't. The moment the ink dries, the startup is dissolved. Their patents become your patents. The brilliant scientists are given wealthy severance packages and airtight non-disclosure agreements. And the cure, the miraculous gene therapy that could have saved millions of lives, you classify it as a redundant asset. You defund the project. You lock the intellectual property in a metaphorical vault, never to see the light of day. You tell the board of directors that the acquisition was a defensive maneuver to protect core revenue streams. You didn't buy a medical breakthrough, you bought a grave, and you buried a miracle alive. just to make sure your quarterly earnings report stayed in the green. You have finally arrived, the C-suite chief commercial officer. The air is thinner up here. You no longer deal with individual drugs or single clinical trials. You deal with macro trends. You deal with the architecture of society itself. And the most profitable architecture you ever built was founded on a very simple, universal human experience: pain. They call it an epidemic now. You see the documentaries, you see the congressional hearings with tearful mothers holding photographs of their dead teenagers. But 10 years ago, inside the soundproof glass walls of your boardroom, it wasn't an epidemic. It was a strategy. It was a masterclass in market penetration. It all started with a brilliantly engineered lie. Less than 1% of patients become addicted. You knew the clinical science didn't support that. You knew the real addiction rates were devastating. But you don't build a $50 billion dynasty by adhering to strict pharmacological realities. You build it by creating an entirely new standard of care. You launched a covert campaign to make pain the fifth vital sign. You funded pain advocacy groups, secretly bankrolled by your corporate treasury, to lobby medical boards. You taught doctors that to leave a patient in pain was a moral failure. When doctors started noticing their patients were getting hooked, you didn't pull the drug. You invented a new medical term to gaslight them: pseudo-addiction. You told the physicians that the signs of addiction were actually just signs of unrelieved pain. The solution? Increase the dosage, double it, triple it. You stood in front of a massive digital heat map in the executive briefing center. You watched the prescription rates light up like wildfire across the Rust Belt, across Appalachia, towns where the factories had shuttered and despair was the only local industry left. You didn't see shattered communities. You didn't see morgues running out of space. You saw an intensely loyal, self-replicating customer base, an untapped demographic with excellent Medicaid coverage. The death toll climbed: 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. An entire generation wiped out by a pill prescribed by their trusted family doctors. Meanwhile, you sat in your corner office, sipping 25-year-old scotch, watching your stock options vest. The bodies were piling up in the streets of Ohio and West Virginia, but up there, 50 floors above the pavement, you couldn't hear the ambulance sirens. You could only hear the applause of your shareholders. You didn't feel like a cartel boss. Cartels are messy. Cartels have to hide from the DEA. You had the DEA's former administrators on your payroll as strategic consultants. You didn't feel like a criminal. You felt untouchable. You felt like a god. How do you sleep at night? That is the question the investigative journalists always want to ask, but they never get past your firewall of PR executives to actually say it. And the truth, you sleep remarkably well on 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton in a gated estate protected by private security. Because by the time you reach the absolute pinnacle of the industry, you have undergone a complete psychological severing. You no longer see human beings, you see abstractions. A 20-year-old diabetic isn't a person struggling to survive. In the boardroom, they are a sticky asset. Their biological dependency is a recurring revenue stream. You calculate their LTV, lifetime value. If they live to be 70 and you aggressively hike your insulin prices by 8% annually, that single patient represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in guaranteed, unescapable yield. People call you evil, but they don't understand the rules of the game. When you sit at the head of the table, the system doesn't just encourage your ruthlessness, it legally mandates it. It is a corporate concept called fiduciary duty. Your legal binding obligation is not to heal the sick, it is to maximize value for your shareholders. If you wake up tomorrow with a sudden burst of conscience, if you slash the price of a life-saving leukemia drug so that uninsured children can afford it, you won't be hailed as a savior. You will be fired by the board of directors before lunch. You will be sued by the hedge funds that own your stock for breaching your fiduciary duty. So, you build a fortress of rationalization. On one side of the wall are the statistics, the parents organizing GoFundMe campaigns to keep their kids alive, the elderly rationing their pills, taking a dose every other day until their hearts finally give out. On the other side of the wall is the only reality you are paid to care about: quarterly earnings, aggressive stock buybacks, and dividend distributions. You convince yourself you are simply the operator of a perfectly logical machine. The market demands relentless growth. You deliver relentless growth. If human lives get caught in the gears and crushed, well, that is just the unavoidable friction of the free market. 5 years later, you decide you are done. You don't get fired. You retire. They throw you a lavish farewell dinner. At the Waldorf Astoria, they toast to your visionary leadership and they hand you a severance package, a golden parachute, worth $42 million. You buy a sprawling villa in Tuscany. You buy a yacht. You have everything you ever ruthlessly calculated you wanted. But when you look in the mirror, you realize the cost. You haven't just extracted wealth from the sick, you extracted your own soul. You feel absolutely nothing. You sit on your balcony, sipping wine, and watch the American news on your iPad. You see politicians arguing about healthcare reform. You see patients crying outside pharmacies, begging pharmacists for a discount. You see the exact same cycle spinning over and over again, grinding human lives into quarterly dividends. People always ask how to fix the system. They march in the streets. They think if they just elect the right politician or pass the right piece of legislation, it will all get better. But you know the terrifying truth. You can't fix a machine that isn't broken. The American healthcare system is a masterpiece of corporate design. It does exactly what we built it to do: extract maximum profit from maximum suffering, shielded by absolute legal protection. So the next time you walk into a pharmacy, look closely at the price tag on your medication. Understand what you are really buying. You aren't paying for groundbreaking science. You aren't paying for a cure. You are paying for my yacht. If this confession opened your eyes to the reality of the medical matrix, don't just get angry. Get smart. Subscribe to this channel right now and share this video with someone who still believes the system is trying to save them. And leave a comment below. What is the most outrageous, unjustifiable medical bill you have ever received? Let's expose them together.